per minute, or somewhere in the neighborhood of 480 in the span of an hour, which is a lot. So our Bagel Bakers Union is about 300 folks, and they change everything. They suddenly make sure working conditions are better. We get paid vacation for our bagel rollers. We even raise the weekly salary from $3 all the way up to $250 a week, which is not too bad for the early, 1800s, right, or early 1900s. Today seems kind of ridiculous, but it was big money then. And to do this, of course, sometimes we have to go on strike. And the Bagel Bakers Union went on strike repeatedly, but my favorite one that they did was in 1951, and it created the famous New York City bagel famine of 1951. So all the bagel bakers go on strike. They shut down 32 of the 34 bakeries that are in New York City, and they do it on a Friday. Saturday, at this point, by 1951, New Yorkers were eating 1.2 million bagels every single weekend, which is way more, we still eat more today, but that was a lot. And suddenly, two places were pushing all this out. The bagel workers went on strike. New Yorkers freaked out because we couldn't get our bagels. The truck workers also went on strike because they were not being paid to deliver everything. And the big crisis that got everyone's attention was, the Broadway musical Bagels and Yaks, which was an off-Broadway complete flop. Their big gimmick was when you showed up, they gave you a bagel to snack on during the show. And since there were no bagels, they moved everyone over to donuts. So this goes on for 3 months. New Yorkers don't know what to do, and so they call in the big guns to negotiate this. They call in a gentleman named Murray Nathan. Murray Nathan was kind of the union negotiator at this point. He had a couple years earlier helped solve the Great Locks Strike of 1947, because you can't just have both. And suddenly New Yorkers discover bagels, and we're on the track. And our union is great. They're pretty wonderful, but the problem is they can't compete with one thing, and it's the thing that makes you hate bagels, right? Big, doughy, fluffy things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all these big fluffy things. Well, here's what did that to you. It was automation. Okay? Lender's bagels show up. I don't know what your take is on Lender's. They look okay, all right. Well, Lender's are from New Haven, Connecticut. They're big, fluffy, doughy, white, boiled things, and they freeze well. And suddenly the size of the bagel goes from this little guy to this big guy, and it all falls apart. And unfortunately, because he figured out how to automate the process, the Bagel Bakers Union goes completely out. And now New Yorkers are stuck with the bagels that we have today. But you probably know there's one thing that makes our bagels the best in the world. Water. It is indeed the water, yes, and we proved it last year. The Smithsonian actually did a study of our water here in New York from our reservoirs to prove that we have lower magnesium and calcium than the rest of the country. So it is officially scientifically proven that New York City pizza and bagels are the best because of that guy. So I figured we'd go somewhere iconic for our bagels, right? So we're going to none other than Russ and Daughters. Yeah, of course, Russ and Daughters. You been recently? No? All right.
Have you been to Russ and Daughters, Mary Alice?
No, I haven't. I don't go around here too much because, my daughter lives here, but she doesn't live in this complex. And she's so busy with her life. I see her in passing.
Right.
Yeah.
I see.
Well, yeah, it's a tricky place to get to sometimes, but we've got one nearby. It was created by this guy. His name is Russ, to the surprise of no one, John Russ. He was an immigrant who started his career selling fish out of a barrel. He was literally on the Lower East Side with a big barrel, hawking fish, and he made so much money doing this that he was able to open his first storefront, which looked kind of like this.
Oh, okay.
Yep, he did that in the span of only 3 years. Wow. He went from barrel to full store in a whopping 3 years. Pretty impressive, right? Especially for the early 1900s. And while he's doing all of this, he actually got so invested in his store that he bought the whole building, bought a nice house in Midwood, and when all of a sudden the economy crashed and he had the option of my money or my building, or my building or my house, he actually got rid of the house and moved above the original Russ and Daughters and just lived out there.
I love that neighborhood.
You love that neighborhood? Well, you just came just in time. We're having bagels. Hope you're hungry.
Oh,
You're welcome to have a seat
Grab
over
a
here,
seat.
Esther.
somebody from town.
Oh, they're from town. Well, we're gonna do traditional ones. We're picking up at Russ and Daughters. So.
Here, Esther, have a seat here.
Yeah.
Right here. You can
So-
sit there.
But the real cool thing about Russ and Daughters is that you probably
Oh, I wish my husband was here.
yeah, you've probably seen some stores that are like and Sons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when John decides he's going to retire in the 1930s, it was traditional to leave your business to your sons. He had no sons. He did, however, have 3 beautiful daughters, Patty, Ida, and Anne. These lovely folks, right? And when they handed it over to them, he decided to name his business Russ and Daughters, making it the very first business in the entire United States to have the and Daughters appellation at the end of it. So pretty iconic. Now it's still in the family, 4 generations in. This is what it looks like today, right? Of course, we've all been close by. And these are the 2 owners. You got Josh Russ Tupper and Mickey Russ Fetterman. She is a direct descendant of our original
Wow.
Russ. Yep. And their problem is the same problem that you were having, which is that Russ and Daughters wanted a specific old school bagel. And we were talking about how automation made our bagels go crazy. And in the 80s in New York City, the bagel went from this to that, right? Exactly. Because everyone just added sugar to their recipe. And Russ and Daughters was being very specific about how the size of their bagel, and they could not get enough quick 4-ounce bagels. So they started making their own. Today, Russ and Daughters is actually in the bagel business, which they've never done before. They produce all of their bagels in Brooklyn, at the Brooklyn Navy Yards, and they use a machine that gets them to the exact size that they want them. No hand rolling like a tall, or an Essa bagel, or all of your
You know, like
favorites.
doing this.
None of this, no, they just tossing it through a machine.
But
it
you know
makes,
what? Tal Bagel on 86th Street, they make their own bagels.
They still roll them by hand, yeah.
You know what? I have to get into the kitchen and see how they're doing it.
Yes, well,
They're all but
yeah.
beautiful.
They're perfect, yeah. And it's only a couple places are still left that do the hand roll thing. So if you want the truly authentic experience, grab your tall bagel, grab your Essa bagel, and then swing by Russ and Daughters, which is just a couple blocks away from us, to pick up your perfect bagel and blocks. So there's breakfast, right? That's where we're starting. But now it's time for lunch. And I've got a controversial one today. Oysters.
Not kosher.
Love them?
I absolutely love them.
Love them? Great, awesome. What do you think?
You know what? The only time I tasted them, I was in France, and they're selling the oysters from carts in the street. And I said, oh, I'm from Israel. So
Okay, so yeah, not quite.
I'm not kosher, but I don't eat those things. So, a friend of mine said, just put it in your mouth and a lemon in it, put it in your mouth and swallow. So I did it. Couldn't feel anything. It just slid into my stomach. Are you supposed to chew it?
I don't think so.
Slipping is exactly,
Yeah.
So how can you feel the taste?
it's the brine.
Sunday night, I had oysters at Gage and Talbot.
Ah.
Yes! I love them so
What?
much!
What did you say?
Gage and Tollner, which is a historic restaurant in Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn. Were you just there?
Yeah.
Whoa!
Sunday night.
Oh my goodness! You should have called me over. I live close by.
Oh, I wish my husband was here.
Yeah, we'll have oysters and a drink together.
Next time.
Next time, perfect. Well, oysters are, I know, are New York. They are New York. They go all the way back to the Lenape people who were here before, any of the folks who showed up, Henry Hudson, any of those folks. And they actually basically lived off of oysters. They called them chittawale, which is what they were known as. And they had massive ones. They actually had close to 250 miles worth of them. And these are not the little oysters that you were slurping down. They'd probably be about the size of my arm. They're massive. And you'd crack them open and you'd be able to eat one and it would really fill you up pretty incredibly. And when Hudson got here, of course, it was all oysters all over the place. It was one of the first things that they wrote back about. How many oysters can you find in New York City was the big discovery. And so because there were so many oysters, they actually started building the city on oysters. So what you got here is known as a midden, or it's basically a group of oysters that are all stuck together. And it's a nice solid base for anything that you might want to build on top of that. So because oysters were such a big deal, the city really kind of took over on them because they were plentiful and cheap. while you were enjoying your beautiful Agent Holder oysters, and I know how much those cost. Yeah, exactly. Had we gone back a couple hundred years, right in front of that exact spot, there would have been an oyster cart that looked like this. This is actually the original oyster cart that started Agent Holder, believe it or not. These guys right here. So it was working man's food. You could slurp them down, call it a day, that was your quick lunch. It was also the all-you-can-eat food for New York. They had something known as the Canal Street Plan. We all know Canal Street today, right? So if you went to Canal Street, you could get as many oysters as you wanted for 6 cents. You know, we're talking like mid-1800s at this point. But the folks were smart because they saw if you were just sitting there tossing back all your oysters, and it had been, a little bit too long, they were going to slip you one that might not have fully opened itself, and then we might not
spend the time to try to open.
Exactly. Well, and also it
They
might
don't taste
taste
very good,
something
don't
to
they?
your
They taste
stomach, and you may not be back to see us next week, kind of thing. So yeah, it was. People were slurping them down so much so that they had plenty left over. We wound up naming these 2 islands. That's Ellis. That's Liberty. They are known as the Great Oyster and the Little Oyster. And on top of all that, we also get the whole city being built on oysters. This packed down land, as it expanded out from the 1600s to the 1800s, were all oyster shells. We also built all of our buildings off of oyster shells. So if you've been to Trinity Church, that was lined with lime, which is created by burning the oyster shells themselves. So homes, all that was built out of that. And last, you probably trucked down Pearl Street. Pearl Street was entirely lined with oysters, and the reason it got the name is people kept finding pearls on the road. So
They did?
They did. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would have been big money. So New York is absolutely an oyster town, and by the time we get to the 1800s, early 1900s, it went back to being like the dive bar. These are the oyster houses that were right underneath the Manhattan Bridge in Lower Manhattan. And you can see piles and piles of them out there. But it was low-class food. It took one man to class up this whole thing. And his name is Thomas Downing. And this is the guy who made oysters from being low-class food in New York to high-class food. So he was a freed slave who moved up to New York in the mid-1800s and decided to open up a classy oyster house. He wanted his oyster house to be right near where all the businessmen were hanging out, so he put it right here at 5 Broad Street, which is, right next to where all the goods are, where everyone's making their money. And he put down fine tablecloths, red velvet robes, and he made it the oyster house where you could bring in important businessmen. And he became the place that everybody looked to, because by the end of the 1800s, he
My
not...
husband is coming home.
Oh, great. Fabulous. He was not only feeding New Yorkers, fancy New Yorkers, he also was the person who hosted Queen Victoria when she came to town. And she gave him a beautiful wristwatch that was sort of a thank you for all of his time, as well as Charles Dickens. And he got to be such a big deal that he franchised. He actually got into pickled oysters. Don't know if anyone likes a pickled oyster here. No?
Do you want pickles?
Pickled oyster?
Pickled oysters?
I don't think I've ever had one.
They're tricky. You might like them if you like. No.
Yeah.
I haven't had one
I don't
by
think
this
I've
time.
ever had
I
Probably not going to try it. That's fair. Yeah. But he actually would pickle his oysters and sell them in these brown jars. I found this at the New York Historical Society. And this was his original sort of like oyster produce. So he was a pretty cool guy. He had a bunch of people say, oh, we think you're, you serve all these oysters, you're going to make people sick.
Come,
he actually
Stephen.
said, if I make anyone sick, I will pay for all of your health care, all the way to
You want to sit
Greenwood
here?
Cemetery. And he never had a
Okay.
smart businessman. But, unfortunately, that
Did
was...
you talk already about all the Jewish places already?
Oh no, we're just doing, we've got plenty
Okay.
coming, don't worry.
Okay.
Plenty coming.
Okay.
But, so by the time we
Stephen,
get,
why don't you
unfortunately,
come and
to the
sit
late
over here?
1800s, though,
Stephen,
you wouldn't...
Stephen, come over
Yeah,
here.
No worries.
Stephen,
Just let him sit where he wants to sit.
Yeah,
Because
it's
you
okay.
still have to go out.
Yeah. So by the time we get to the late 1800s, though, you wouldn't want to eat the oysters around here. Yeah. By 1910, the oysters in New York City were pretty disgusting. And by 1927, it became illegal to eat an oyster coming out of that river right there. Yeah. So you don't necessarily want to do it today. However, the good news is New York oysters are coming back. So there was a very cool group called the Billion Oyster Project. I don't know if you guys heard, maybe you've heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have people connected to it? Or?
No, it's just, it's just that I like sometimes catch different conservancies that are, you know, a part of New York.
Yeah.
And how disgusting our water has been and how it's coming back.
Yeah.
I just find it really interesting.
Yeah, so they actually work with school kids, New York City public school kids, to show them, to teach them how to grow oysters in the water, as well as teaching them the science of measuring oysters and caring for them, with the goal of cleaning up the water and ultimately getting us to be able to eat New York oysters again. So fingers crossed. It'll be a little bit, but we're on the way back, which is awesome.
But you know that on Grand Central, once a year there is like a festival of oysters.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because here's the thing, for lunch, I figured we'd have oysters, but I also figured we'd go here.
Yes.
Stephen, did you ever go to
Right.
the oyster thing in Grand Central?
You been? Oh my goodness. Do you thumbs up for oysters? Awesome. Great. Fabulous. So I assume everybody's at least knows about, or maybe you've even been to the Grand Central Oyster House? You have? Yeah. Was it a regular spot for you, or
No.
just a special occasion?
Well, just an occasion anyway, yeah,
Well.
not very often.
No, yeah, it's a classic. I always love it because of those arches, right? Those gorgeous arches. So they're known as the Gustavino arches, made by this guy named Raphael Gustavino. He designed this whole structure, and it's one of only a couple places in New York that has them. The other one is way downtown at City Hall. If you've ever been to the City Hall 6 train station,
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
That has those big arches, exact same design as what you've got here. So this is when it opened. It opened 3 weeks after Grand Central Terminal itself opened. So it has been there literally as long as
But you
it is.
know that underground, where the subway goes, number 6 turns around.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that?
Yes.
And they have this arches also.
Yep. Those are, it's the exact same ones. It's the exact same designer, exact same style, which is so cool. So this place opens up, but it wanted to become the nicest oyster house in all of New York City. They wanted to even take the Downing and bring it higher. So they poach this guy. His name is Victor Yasensky. Probably never heard of him, but if we were living in New York around the early 1900s, we would have known him from this place, which is the Knickerbocker Hotel on the corner of Broadway and 42nd Street. And this was the fanciest hotel in all of New York City. They had the nicest oyster house. So to make this one, they poached him. They gave Yasensky his own spot, and he transformed it and stayed there for over 33 years. And they were selling probably the most oysters in all of New York City by the time we got to like the 1950s. Why? Because of trains. So not only do you have all the business people coming in, but folks were literally taking the train into New York City for the sole purpose of eating oysters at the Oyster House. So that's a cover from the New Yorker in 1944. You can see pretty bustling. People were literally rushing in to get all that food. And the Oyster House was doing great until the 1950s. Because we all know Grand Central kind of went bankrupt, kind of fell apart. It shuts down, and of course, an oyster house inside Grand Central really can't do anything with that. And they eventually close up shop. This was one of the last pictures that was taken in its original form. You know. But, of course, Jackie O comes in, works her magic.
I remember.
Exactly, saves Grand Central, and the owners of the Grand Central Oyster House at this point are Union News. And if you've ever been to like a Hudson News, yeah, in Grand Central or one of those, they're just those news stands where you can get a paper and soda and magazines and things. They owned the restaurant, and they did not want to be in the restaurant business at all. So they sold it to this guy, Jerome Bonds. Jerome Bonds, you may recognize as being the guy who created the Rainbow Room. Yeah?
Really what?
The Rainbow Room? Yeah, you've been
Do
there?
you know about
Into that one?
Years ago.
Years ago, right? Well, he invented this idea of a themed restaurant, and he decided that he would work his magic. And he went on a massive marketing campaign that looked like this. What's your take?
What's happening?
Yes, exactly, right?
What's happening?
No one's entirely sure. So the ladies are ready to party at the annual Oyster Frenzy. I mean, this was not quite the vibe that our original restaurateurs had. However, believe it or not, this worked.
Check mark?
Yep, the Oyster House completely turned around. They were open consistently from Grand Central's reopening until, recently. And they are going to be opening in a couple weeks.
Our son got married here
He did? At the Oyster House? Or
at the Rainbow Room.
At the Rainbow Room. Oh, perfect. Well, then you've got a perfect connection. And the cool thing is that today, so they had a fire that shut them down for like a week. But today, the Oyster House is still there. It is currently owned by 16 employees. So they sold it to 16 of the workers there. And every year, they serve 1.6 million oysters. And in fact, they tried to do like sandwiches or other things, but no one bought it. They had a BLT that they could not sell on their menu because everyone just wanted the oysters. And I really wish I could end this story by saying that they were only eating local New York City oysters, right? I wish I could make this thing come full circle for us. I'm really sorry I can't. What I can tell you is most of the oysters are from Long Island, so the Blue Points and all that good stuff. And they buy all of their oysters in a market in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx. So even if we're not eating local oysters, at least we're buying our oysters relatively nearby, right? So there's the Oyster House. All right, halfway through the day. Hope you're still hungry because next up we're having steak.
Oh. I love them.
Right. Oysters to steak. It's a big day. It's a big day. So I hope I have steak fans.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. How do you take your steak?
Medium rare.
Medium rare. Well done, sir. You will do well with the folks at Delmonico's. Exactly. The Gage and Tollner people like it a little darker, so they're more seared. Awesome. How do you take your steak?
Medium well.
Medium well.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you're fitting more into the Gage and Tollner side of things. I like it. Ketchup, of course. For you, yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Awesome. Steak eater. Yeah.
You're taking about steak?
Yeah.
Medium rare.
Medium rare. Medium well or medium rare?
Medium rare.
Rare. Okay, perfect.
Rare to medium rare.
Rare to medium rare.
Yeah.
Ooh, you like it nice and juicy.
I do.
Perfect. Oh,
Yeah.
lovely. And sir, how do you like your steak? Medium? Perfect. All right, so we're all in that medium area. Cool. So we're doing the Delmonico steak because that's our New York steak. And I gotta grab my notes on this one
Are you
because the
familiar with
Delmonico's
this
people
steak?
will kill me if I describe the way that they do their steak because it's a whole thing. Okay. So I wrote this one down because I wanted to make sure I didn't screw it up. Okay. So the Delmonico steak, of course, okay, is officially a ribeye with a thick cut preparation. That is the definition of a Delmonico steak.
Is that down in that Moore Street area?
Like William Street, right down, way downtown. But when Delmonico's first opened up, the New York strip steak or the Delmonico steak was basically whatever you could possibly get that was good. Because steak in New York City before they showed up was disgusting. Okay? That's what it should look like today. This is the kind of shady place you would have been getting your steaks in the 1800s. Because the only place to get a decent steak in New York City around the 17 and 1800s was a British boarding house, where their general idea of a good time was take a chunk of steak, boil it in water, serve it to you with 2 vegetables that they choose, and give you a piece of bread on a fork, and maybe some bacon.
Oh, my.
That, you appetized? You're gonna eat so much ketchup for this one, you're not even gonna be able to deal with it.
But they didn't have ketchup, did they?
They didn't, no.
Hey, Hans was not around.
Exactly, we're gonna have to time travel to make this happen, right? So, but finally New Yorkers realized that this was not the way to eat steak. And so we created something known as the steak banquet, which looked a little bit more like this, the banquet beef steak. Now this starts happening in the early 1800s. Probably experienced this. This was like a way to celebrate if you were a working class person in New York, or if you were a politician and you wanted to convince someone to vote for you. Because what they would do is they would line up bits of medium-ish steak on little pieces of bread. Probably.
Why on bread?
Well, see, this is the this is the question I ask myself too. Okay, why are we wasting it on
When
bread?
I came to this country and I was working in a hospital and they had, what is that steak meat with bread? What is that called? couldn't see the look of it and the taste of it. That was unbelievable. Why would they have meat and bread?
Well, see, I feel like we're just wasting time with the bread, right? We just want to go straight to
You
the
need
steak.
something to sop up the juice.
Yeah,
Right,
it's-
so I'm assuming that's why the bread was there.
It was basically, this was a plate.
Yeah.
And the purpose was not to eat any of the bread. The
Right.
purpose was to just eat the steak. But the way but people would actually hold contests throughout this historic, like going back to the 1800s, even the early 1900s. Well, what they do is they would stack up all the bread and you would show off how well you had done with this massive mound of bread next to you, right? So this is how we're eating our steak in New York. Not very classy, okay? Next, we step it up one level. Then we get what's known as a chop house. Also British, also pretty disgusting. You would show up to the chop house and you would say, "What's for dinner?" And they would literally say this, and it would be a piece of meat. That would be your sole option. Nothing good. We added chicken to the situation, but it's the first time people start grilling steak. We actually put it on a stove and do that like nice sear, the crust that we like on the outside. But then finally someone decides to step this up one level, and finally New York City gets its very first steakhouse. And this is it. You've been?
Yes.
You've been, yeah, of
I've been
course.
to the homestead.
Yeah, of course. Homestead, like classic New York institution, goes all the way back to, I will check the date so these people don't hurt me, 1868.
That's the one on like around 14th, right, the
Mhm.
meatpacking
It's
district.
right in the meatpacking district.
Yeah.
And part of the reason it actually showed up there is because it was pretty easy for them to get meat, right? This was the first place that you could get an actual cut of steak prepared more or less the way that you wanted it, with a regular sort of preparation that specialized in these steaks. Delmonico's was doing a little everything. These guys took the idea of just going out for steak to a level where there was a nice tablecloth, you had a nice waiter come to you, maybe have a glass of wine next to it. And they have been going in that same location since 1868. There we go, good. Couple things to know. That one right there, see her up top? You need to say hi to Annabelle. Annabelle showed up in 1953 because someone dropped off, just left her in front of it, and they said, "Okay, cool, we'll put her on the roof."
Oh my God.
So completely unintentional. The founders of this restaurant didn't really intend for her to be there, but you know, she's kind of an icon.
That's hilarious.
And the reason that they've been so successful is that they were, oh yeah, they also did Lady Gaga's meat dress. Don't know.
Oh,
They were the progenitors of this. Can't not do that one, right?
oh God.
But the reason they were so successful is that when they opened up, and as we get to the early 1900s, New York City was responsible for about 200, and we had over 250 slaughterhouses in the meatpacking district, and we were responsible for a third of the beef in the United States. So we were a steak town. It was pretty easy for New Yorkers to get a good taste for steak. Now, I'll be honest, Homestead's a little bit out of my price range.
Yeah, but how did they deliver the meat from New York to
From New York?
California?
Oh, trains. Oh my goodness, yeah. Shipping
It
it
was
all.
never slow.
Well, yeah. But
Yeah,
they
and
were,
I mean, this is literally meatpacking.
Yeah.
This area right here is just where the trains will come in.
Yep.
And just nothing but meatpacking.
Yeah.
People live there now. though.
Yeah, it's now fancy, but
Yeah.
the High Line, you know, was actually trains for meat to come in and out. So this was the one. But if you really want to keep, like, New Yorkers, we can get steak wherever we want, right?
Yeah.
But if you really want to keep it classy, Homestead's actually still the place to go. They currently have the most expensive steak in all of New York City. It is Wagyu beef, which is a Japanese style of preparation of beef, super marbly, super creamy, and it runs $350 a steak. So anybody want to take free meat to? No?
Doesn't
To
look
some-
that
to a steak?
appetizing to
No?
me.
It's,
Looks pretty good, right?
yeah.
To take care of
Did you
yourself.
ever-
Okay, fair enough, fair enough.
Did you?
But we gotta hit, of course, the classic Delmonico's. So I'm curious, has anyone been? Has anyone had a delicious dinner at Delmonico's? Yeah? Okay, there we go. Sylvia's been.
Delicious.
Delicious, right? All right, so you've been to Delmonico's? You remember why? What brought you there? Business. Well, that's the reason Delmonico's exists. Business, right? But let's be clear. Delmonico's is actually Del Monaco's. Okay? Del Monaco's. Because they're not Italian, they're Swiss. So, they were the first restaurant in New York City. Probably the first restaurant in the United States. And the reason that they showed up is because the Marquis de Lafayette threw a fit. So he came to the United States in 1925 and shows up, they want to have a big meal for him, and what happens? There's no place to fit anybody. And the French are appalled. A year prior, the Delmonico brothers, Giovanni and Pietro, show up in New York City and they say, this is ridiculous, we need to fix this, we're gonna start a restaurant. So they scrape together $20,000 in gold coins, and they open up a little patisserie cafe at the corner on William Street, which is where this is located. And it sold coffee and pastries. Just a little kind of European, have a sit down, have a sip. This was revolutionary. No one in New York had any idea what this was. They were shocked that you could just sit down and have a cup of coffee and enjoy yourself. So they blew up. Everyone starts coming, everyone starts showing up. Visitors out of the country start coming and they say, okay, well this is going well, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna take this one level further. We're gonna put a dining room on it. And we're not just gonna put any normal dining room on it, we're going to throw on a cart or a menu. We're going to give you a list of all the different things that you could possibly eat with an individual price tag on each one. I know none of this is shocking today, but Americans had no idea what was going on. Now this is their original menu. This goes all the way back. And they, like, New Yorkers thought that this was the greatest thing in the world. And so Giovanni and Pietro realized that they can take this to the next level. So they involve cousin Lorenzo, who shows up from Switzerland, and is a chef and a businessman and says, okay, let's make this happen. And not only do they want to be the best restaurant in New York City, they also want to be our first local restaurant, because they not only open up that spot downtown, they also head just over that direction to Williamsburg and create their own farm. And they introduce New Yorkers to artichokes, tomatoes, all the different foods that we've never had were being grown right there in Williamsburg and carted across the way. And it's going great until the Great Fire of 1933, when everything burned, or 35, when everything burns down. And Giovanni and Pietro and Lorenzo say, okay, well, here's the thing we're going to do. We're going to get a bigger space downtown. And they buy the building that we now know, but they want it done perfectly. So they actually deck out the entire space to their own specifications. A lot has changed, but if you take a look at those two columns there, those are original designs that Giovanni himself drew, sketched, picked the marble, and had it all set up. And they continued to be the businessman lunch, right? The spot that you went for a fancy business lunch, the best place to bring all of your business associates, as well as the best place to throw a 43-course banquet for over 1,000 people, which is what that was. They were the best place to eat in New York City. I think continue to be one of the best. But they also did a couple other fun things. There's too many to list, but my favorite one was they did Mark Twain's 70th birthday. So that's him having his Delmonico steak, enjoying himself and looking snazzy. And then they started to blow up. They moved uptown. There was one near Macy's. There was one pretty close to where we are right now. And that all went great until 1918. I think we all know what happened in 1918. Prohibition, right? It destroyed them. Because no one wants to have a nice business lunch without a martini, right? Fortunately, they had to scale back all their locations. The last uptown location closed in 1921 and served mineral water. Sorry. So that was them until then. And today they're still open. They're closed right now, but they're going to be opening in the fall. And they'll still do their Delmonico steak. And again, they'll kill me if I get this wrong, so I wrote it down for you. Here is today how you make a Delmonico steak. You get a 21-ounce ribeye. You age it for 6 weeks. You grill it for 3 minutes on each side. Cook to your preferred doneness, from medium well to rare, or medium rare, or whatever you got. And then you serve it with what's called meat butter, which is an herb butter that you melt over the whole thing. And from 1850, when it was first introduced, until today, it is still the most popular item on their menu. So if you're looking for steak, you know where to go, right? Awesome. All right, one more thing. Last one, of course, is dessert, because there's always time for dessert, which is the black and white cookie. I know.
I have to laugh at that.
Why do you have to laugh about that?
Because there was on First Avenue,
Mhm.
between 87 and 88, was a restaurant that was 100 years old.
Mhm.
Everything was made of wood, whatever, and they had their own thing. And they were going to close. That was 2 years ago.
Mhm.
People were standing there in line to get the black and white cookies.
Yeah. I mean, it is about as iconic as you can get for New York,
They
right?
say that they froze them.
Yeah, I
There
know.
were just like tons of them.
Exactly. So you're a fan, I gather. No? Okay.
I didn't know
Black
what
and
black and
whites?
white cookies were.
You know, they're in the lineup.
In the lineup? Okay, so but not top of the list. Not top of the list. Okay, fair. What do you think?
It is.
Oh, I think they're delicious.
They're delicious. Okay, so do you like the white side first or the black side first?
Black side.
Black side. Okay, see, this is what I'm talking about. That's the kind of intention we're looking. Why black side first?
It just appeals to me.
Yeah.
It's really simple.
Yeah, people say there's a specific way to eat one, but here's the problem. The black and white cookie is actually a giant question mark. We do not know that much about it. And most importantly, it is not a cookie. It is a cake. It is a cake. It's made with cake batter, which is
It is a
why,
cake.
oh, see, there we go. You can see they're a little bit puffy on the center. Yep, that is exactly what they're. They're a cake dough. And the origin of the black and white cookie is a giant question mark. If you ask some people, they will tell you that the black and white cookie was invented by these fine folks, Hemstron's Bakery, Utica, New York. And they would be very pleased to tell you that that is their invention. But they are wrong.
Let's see. Yin and yang.
Exactly. They're wrong. And you want to know why they're wrong? Because they're actually making something that are called half moons. So let's compare, okay? I've got black and whites here, right? I've got half moons here. Here's what you need to know so that you don't get thrown a half moon, okay? Black and white cookies have that shellacked shininess on the top like these guys have right here, right? These guys use fluffy frosting, okay? These guys have a denser dough. These guys have a fluffier dough. And most importantly, if you ever see one with a chocolate cookie base, that is not a black and white. It is absolutely a half moon because we New Yorkers do not stand for that kind of thing. All right? So the black and white cookie has this like kind of mythic appeal, and we still don't know where it is. We see another reference to it coming out of, oh right, we think it might be a cookie because of the word koosje, which meant little cake in Dutch. And we know that the Dutch were making koosje or cake when they got here. So there was a theory that they invented the black and white, right? Why not make a cake with frosting on it? Also wrong. They did not have enough sugar in order to make this thing happen. So definitely not them. Then there's a theory that it came out of World War II, because in Germany, the soldiers who were going to Germany to protect people and take care of things showed up with black and white cookies that were known as Amerikaners and are still something that you can buy in Germany today. Except that is wrong too, because those cookies predate all of this. So the black and white cookie is a giant mystery. Today, we mostly get it from Seinfeld, right? And of course, most recently, these guys. There's actually been a spike in sales of black and white cookies in New York because of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I don't know if anyone's watched it.
Which one?
The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It's a streaming television
No,
show.
we
Very
You
fun.
haven't seen that, Esther?
Remember, you know what?
Yeah.
I
Have you
didn't
seen this
like
one?
it.
Maisel?
No.
No.
Huh?
Well,
Remember?
it's a television show. It's a pretty good
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
But we've seen it blow up. But if you're looking for the actual source, what I'm going to argue is the first people to do black and whites, it's going to be these guys.
Delicious, that's what I'm talking
Exactly,
about.
yeah. So you know it.
I know it.
It's pretty close to where you said you were living. Did you ever go to Glazers?
Is it in the Bronx?
No, it's just a couple blocks. It would have been just a couple blocks down that road.
42
Right.
years we were buying a birthday cake there.
Well, there you go. Oh, perfect. See, that's pretty incredible.
I did stop in there once.
Yeah. Do you remember what you got? Probably not a black and white. Yeah.
No, unlikely.
Awesome. Well, this was the handiwork of this gentleman. His name was John Glazer, German immigrant, who actually lived on the Lower East Side and came up to this chunk of the area because what you're standing in used to be, it is Yorkville, but used to be German. This was all Germans. And so he was going to church up here. He had a little bakery in Bloomingdale's, but he found the building on the corner of First Avenue and 87th Street and bought it and said, this will be my bakery. And when he opens it, it looks kind of like this. And their first thing they put out are breads, cakes, and most importantly, a mysterious cookie that was black on one side and white on the other. It's on their very first menu. But it was pretty hard work, okay? They moved above it to keep everything going. It was hot, gross, kind of disgusting, sweaty work in the basement to keep all this going. And it was a 24-hour business. So poor John never got a day off. And the whole situation could not be let to just run. So his entire family moved in and kept it going for close to 2 generations.
I remember, you know, the girl that was giving you the cakes, she was one of the family.
Exactly.
They just did not want to take over the business.
Well, they did actually. It got down to their 2 sons, John and Herb.
Maybe one son, maybe she was a granddaughter, but
Yeah.
that was it.
Yeah, John and Herb were the 2 that took it over. That's Herb as a kid.
Mm.
This is Herb the day it closed down. And Herb actually had a pretty wild story. He did not want to work in baking. He wanted to be a dentist, which I think is ironic given what you see in this picture. But he could not get into dental school and realized he liked working with his hands. So he put this all together. He lived above the store, kept the 24-hour rhythm of a bakery that goes at this pace going, and then eventually decided it was time to retire. So 2018, July 1st, Glazier's closes down. That was the line. That was the line for people to get their very last black and white cookies. But there is a problem with all of this. While I will give them credit for OG black and white cookie, let's take a look at these black and white cookies, okay? Okay. Example A, appropriately, properly made black and white cookie. What is wrong with this picture?
It's not black and white.
It's not black and white, it's fluffy frosting, which is not how we make a black and white cookie. So I'm going to declare that there's still a
Was
giant.
that at Glazier's?
This is at Glazier's, yep.
That's a Glazier the last minute?
That was their
Because
last
they
one.
had to do so much.
Probably, right? They were just shoving him out the door, right? So there's our day of iconic eating in New York. We started with bagels at Russ & Daughters. We grabbed oysters at the Grand Central Oyster Bar. We grabbed steak at Delmonico's, and we ended with black and white cookies, questionably from Glazier's. So that's this week. I'd like to know what you're hungry for next week. So any requests? What would you like me to talk about next week? Favorite
What
foods?
is the other restaurant?
Fried chicken.
Fried chicken, ooh, good
I
one.
find fried chicken in New York.
You know,
really good.
actually, chicken and waffles is a New York invention.
Really?
Yeah, chicken and waffles is a New York invention.